Now that you've learned how to write your remainder as a fraction, we are going to learn how to write our remainder as a decimal. So it's a very similar process to writing your remainder as a fraction. So I'm going to do this question. 47 divided by 4. Alright, 4 goes into 4 once, and 1 times 4 is 4, and I subtract that, and I get 0. And then I bring down my next number, which is 7, and my divisor of 4 goes into 7 one time, and 1 times 4 is 4. Subtract that, and I get 3. I have no more numbers to bring down, so 3 becomes my remainder. Now, just like writing your remainder as a fraction, you would write your answer as 11 with your remainder over your divisor. So it would be 11 and 3/4. Now, in order to write your remainder as a decimal, you need to make sure to get a 10 or a 100 in your denominator. So how could we get 10 or 100 in our denominator? Well, 4 doesn't go into 10, but 4 does go into 100. You have to think about money. Think about money. 4 times 25, as in quarters, equals 100. So I'm going to write that down here, 100. And 3 times 25, if I think about quarters, equals 75. So I've created an equivalent fraction with my denominator being a 100. So my answer is still 11, and now instead of 11 and 3/4, it's 11 and 75 hundredths. And now you know how to write 75 hundredths as a decimal, don't you? 0.75. But instead of this 0, we have 11. So our answer really becomes 11.75. And that's how we change our answer from a fraction to a decimal. Let's do another couple examples so that you get the hang of it. Alright, let's try this one. 28 divided by 5. Well, 5 doesn't go into 2, so I'm going to look at the first 2 digits and see if 5 can go into 28. And I know that 5 times 5 is 25, so that gets me as close to 28 without going over. And I'm going to subtract that, and I have 3 left, and no more numbers to pull down, so 3 becomes my remainder. So then I write my answer as a fraction, so it's 5 with a remainder of 3 over my divisor of 5. So 5 and 3/5. I'm going to just write that down here so I have some space to work. 5 and 3/5. Okay. Now in order to write any fraction as a decimal, you have to get 10 or 100 in the numerator. You have to get a 10 or 100 in the numerator. So is there a way to get this 5 to be a 10 or 100? Well, I could multiply it by 2 and get 10. And then I should also do the same thing to my numerator so that I have an equivalent fraction. So I'll multiply that by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. So now I have 5 and 6/10 as an answer. 5 and 6/10, I know how to write 6/10 as a decimal, 0.6. But instead of writing 0.6, I'm going to do 5.6. And that's the answer. Let's do one more question together. Let's try this one. 13 divided by 2. So I'm going to write it like this for long division. Now 2 cannot go into 1, so I'm going to look at both numbers, 13. And 2 times what gets me close to 13? Well, I know that 2 times 6 equals 12, so that's really close to 13. And I do that math, I subtract, and I have 1. And now there's no more numbers here to bring down, so my remainder becomes 1. So my answer as a fraction is 6 with a remainder of 1 over my divisor of 2. Remember, my divisor becomes my denominator. Now, in order to write that as a decimal, I have 6 1/2. I have to get either a 10 or 100 in the denominator. So how could I get a 10 or 100 in the denominator? Well, I know that 2 times 5 gives me 10. So I'm going to multiply my numerator by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. So now I have 5/10. And 5/10 is written like 0.5. But I can't forget about my 6 whole numbers that I have in it as an answer. So my final answer becomes 6.5. Because the 6 is like my answer, and the decimal 5 is like my remainder over my divisor. And that's how you write your remainder as a decimal.